the legal world, and I have shared with different colleagues, and it is a constant. I mean, we live in a world that the achievements of women are not celebrated, and we are part of the problem, I think, and we are part of the solution. I think that it's not abandoning our values, our communal values as women, and our way of sharing across cultures. It is celebrating those values that do not elevate only one person and put one person on the top and the rest but it's trying to make the case and celebrate collective efforts, for instance, and try to celebrate also not only when one person gets to the top, but when we all get better together. And that's something I learned in my country, and I learned in the way that I had the pleasure to work with the Nobel Prize Rigoberta Menchú, and how it was a conflict because on the one hand, Western culture wanted the indigenous leader, a little bit like with Malala, the female underprivileged woman who goes to the top, and that was a complete clash with the communal culture of indigenous peoples in Guatemala. I mean, but somehow she managed to harmonize that. And I remember a gesture. We were about to bring all the witnesses of a genocide case to Spain to testify about the atrocities, and there were many women in the group, and I learned from this gesture a lot because she invited us to her house, and they were very intimidated because she's a very famous person. It's like you inviting us to eat at your house. We would be like, what will happen? No,
lots of vegetables.
No. Will we have any food? No. But when we arrived, she was cooking, and she's a Nobel Prize, and she was the director of this foundation, and she's traveling the world. She was cooking. She cooked for everyone there, and she served one by one to all the women who are just usually, like, in very oppressive situation. She had that gesture of sharing a meal and then opening a coffer of the traditional clothes and and giving this very special that it takes 1 month to make one of these blouses to each one of them, and sharing a space and then dancing together. And I think that this kind of this way of leadership, that is sharing and serving to others and being part of something, is something sometimes gets blurred, and is when women are pushed to these figures that we maybe find better ways of leadership and governance than those that are imposed by some standards of the superwoman who is at the top of the hierarchy, and I do not believe that women achievements should be measured by the number of CEOs, honestly.
Yeah, good one.
So obviously agree with everything the points Renata was saying. I would just add that from sort of having been involved in the tech world for the last few years and sort of seeing that some of the brightest minds in it are women, and their work is seen within the community a lot. To me, there's something that does sort of mire that whole atmosphere, and I really felt it when I sort of got some newspaper articles and things written about me after I helped Edward Snowden, and that was actually that I'm sorry to say, the media do play a large part in sort of trying to bring women down into a certain pigeonhole of I'm a would-be journalist, I'm a companion, I'm an assistant. I even had journalists writing articles about me that I'd worked with on publications one-to-one as a journalist, that then sat there and like, oh yes, she's his assistant and she washes his socks. Whereas I'd actually sat there and had big conversations with them about like, which document will we release first, or which story is the most important, and then even they, who had lived with me through these things, reduced me to those roles. And I think that this is something that we all as a community, men and women, need to fight back on, to really celebrate the women and their voices as they should be being heard. And it was something that we were quite conscious of when three of us got together to write this book, was that we weren't going to sit there and discuss in large details these sorts of issues. We actually wanted to make a big point by not speaking about those things and just being women with voices in this arena talking about those issues, because that should be enough to speak volumes in and of itself.
Excellent.
Yes. Angela?
Yeah, I agree with both things that were said, and I also don't want to put blame here and there, because, but it is definitely so that the narrative in the media is always, it's somehow more sexy to report about guys, and I think it's not only in the media, it's somehow also a kind of brainwashing that we all have. I mean, I assume that your experiences working in Hollywood might have a similar, how can I say, phenomenon, you know, how women have to be, what expectations they have to meet, and if they don't, they are ignored, and so on. You know, I think it's a general problem, and in this case, it's also very specific because this world is kind of associated more with men, but I think the reality changed a lot. And I think it is a process somehow till this will change and really get into the brains of people to also not follow that narrative anymore. Yeah, and I think that maybe, at the moment we also experience, I think, a very, very exciting time, very difficult, but also exciting time where, I mean, if somebody would have told me that Donald Trump would be president of the US, you know, some years ago, I mean, I wouldn't believe it, you know, but I think this escalation is maybe good, you know, because he's like the epitome of lots of problems.
I think we have to think it's good, right? And it's definitely chaos breeds some kind of good things. Seeds are being planted and things are happening. And definitely dispelling the myth that there aren't really powerful women in the internet community, because these women are here to prove that. How important has been how important do you feel the role of WikiLeaks has played in internet activism?
Well, it was the before and after, and I have to, here I'm going to be harsh with my fellow internet activists, because in 2010, I was right here, you know, I was here trying to assist the legal avalanche and the storm of attacks that WikiLeaks experienced. If we had stand up by our principles back then, and if the community had come together like strongly against private censorship, against this shying away from principles of the free press, we will not be in this mess that we are today. And I think that I saw many so-called courageous activists shaking the hands and shying away from the battle that we had in front of us. In fact, there were very, very few courageous and principled people fighting the good fight for WikiLeaks, for the freedom of WikiLeaks to publish. And after a while, it faded away. And we didn't tackle the problems. We didn't tackle the problem of private censorship. Look now we are like the big social media companies that were not as big at that point are becoming like practical ministries of truth. Yes. We didn't go strong enough against the persecution by the US government against WikiLeaks, and by the fact that they were like effectively using lawfare to silence a journalist. What happens now? Now you have Donald Trump as president. Now we have a very uncertain future in Europe, and the right wing is on the rise. If that was the example after a disruptive truth was released, if that was the battle that we fought, what is the expectation of those in power? Okay, we can silence Western dissidents, we can completely cut the funding of a media organization, and we can put into jail or into house arrest Western journalists. If that's completely valid in the UK, that's completely valid for Europe, then it's completely valid for anyone. And I think particularly the relationship Silicon Valley politics, that was the key moment to expose it. And it was the response was not strong enough, but it also showed the true colors of many groups. And it unveiled a net of really cozy relationships between governments and Silicon Valley, between governments and journalists even. And I think that the WikiLeaks moment really revealed many, really it unveiled more than just the documents.
Right.
Beautiful.
For me, I suppose the answer really hinges on what one defines as activism. I see WikiLeaks as a media organization. It publishes information. It works with journalists internally to WikiLeaks and outside and other media organizations to go through the documents, and then it publishes the documents in journalism online. So in theory, that shouldn't be termed as activism, that should be just termed as journalism. However, I can see where the question comes from in the sense that it does, within the aspect of journalism, push boundaries and work to change things. And there are a number of things that I think that have been quite groundbreaking and changing in the way that WikiLeaks has worked with within the media landscape and also with just generally the internet landscape. The obvious example is from right at the beginning, the online Dropbox. This was an invention of Julian's many years ago, back in 2006, and WikiLeaks, this was sort of the big hook that it had right at the beginning that nobody else had. Now it's extremely pleasing to me to see that there is a secure online Dropbox in a number of newsrooms, most major newsrooms around the world, that are being created and maintained by a number of different organizations. And I think that this is a great achievement and something that Julian and WikiLeaks should definitely be proud of. I think that the concept of mass publications, and by that I mean sort of massive amounts of data that are put online by WikiLeaks, I think, and a number of the journalists have agreed with me on various stages around the world, that, for example, in the Snowden publications, nowhere near as much would have been published if the ground hadn't already been set for a large number of documents to be published by WikiLeaks back in 2010. I think this is a great way forward for journalism and the public as a whole. And then following on from that, because these large data sets were put out online, and we really encouraged just everybody in the public to get involved in them, and many people did, setting up their own citizen journalism organizations, just doing their own independent research on blogs, and WikiLeaks really allowed people to get engaged with this data and start to explore and question other journalists in journalism, because they saw, well, we can check source documents. This gives another interesting thing. So where's your source for here? So I think in those sorts of aspects, it did have a lasting impact on journalism, and following on from that to many people around the world in what I suppose could therefore be called activism.
It's interesting that it's radical to post true information.
Yeah, I was
an
on
activist. It doesn't really make sense to call it activism, I guess.
No, but that's how people refer to it. There was an interesting panel I was on where somebody said, well, there's radical transparency, and I was like, wow, like, you're a journalist, and like, we're making a lot of things transparent, and this is radical. Like, I just didn't understand how that. I thought that was your job, and anyway, apparently that's how it's seen. It's radical. It's actually, anyway. I think that it's just been a great service to journalism and people around the world.
Well, it's definitely stirred the pot.
Yeah, that's true.
Angela, sorry.
She might have missed the question.
Oh, the question, yes. I said, how important has been the role of WikiLeaks in internet activism? Do you feel?
Now I got confused. I think I just want to point out that they also, as a media organization, have a perfect record of accuracy so far, which is really a lot, I think, considering the sheer amount of documents they released. And also, I think maybe when we look in the future, I really wonder if humankind wants to have access to all documents if you know let's say a person in the future who looks back, maybe I don't know, in 100 years or something, wants to have access to all documents that happened in the past, or they want to depend on one journalist who decides what he will release or not. So I think that for me it's not a question actually what version as an archive I would prefer. I think it's a little bit like the big Alexandria
Library.
Library of humankind. It's also the future library of documents. I think that is the future for WikiLeaks.
Right. How important has been is the internet changing the course of contemporary politics, and if so, how?
This is your baby.
Yeah, well, for me at some moment it was a big moment of hope, and we discussed it in the book, the Zapatista Revolution.